Please start, Shalgi.
Yeah. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Welcome on behalf of Advaita Academy to all the viewers on this 8th day of month-long Global Festival of Oneness 2021 to celebrate Bhagavad Acharya Adi Shankara Jayanti Utsav. Let us start with chanting the Shanti Mantra. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamidachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Today we are privileged to have Kathirasan K to give the lecture on the mindfulness and Advaita Vedanta. Kathirasan was born in Singapore and lived in all his life in Singapore. He had tutelage with Swami Satprakashananda Saraswati of Atma Vidya Vanam, studying Advaita Vedanta. He has authored many books on Advaita Vedanta and secular mindfulness. He teaches Vedanta to various seekers of self-knowledge. His recent book includes Advaita Vedanta and Shiva Samhita, the first ever Vedantic exposition. I now request Kathirasan Ji to start his lecture. We will take some questions after Kathirasan Ji finishes his lecture. Thank you. Over to you, Kathirasan Ji.
Thank you, Sanjeev Ji, for the introduction. Let us begin with a short invocation. Om Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Sada Shiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Namaste everyone. Thanks for being here, taking this journey with me to discover this topic called Vedanta and Modern Mindfulness. And I have a slide deck to present so that it is a little easier for the audience to appreciate this topic. So I'm going to share my slide right now. I hope all of you can see this. So I want to start off my presentation by looking at the intentions behind this presentation. And many of you may know that today, mindfulness is a buzzword. If you were to Google the word mindfulness, you get thousands of pages describing what mindfulness is and how it has become a popular phenomenon. So the current intention for this short presentation, I'm using the word short very consciously because this topic deserves probably a book to do the comparison in a way that it would do justice. Nevertheless, I'm taking this task to present this in possibly 45 to 50 minutes, and then I'll take some questions. So the intention behind today's session is just this: a dispassionate study of mindfulness and Advaita Vedanta, primarily to examine its similarities and differences. That's the main goal. I deliberately use the word dispassionate because I wanted to present this subject as it is. All right, that's my intention. I'm trying to, as I present, I'm going to be neutral with regard to the topic to allow you to form your own conclusions, and that could possibly be key takeaways for you. So basically, I want to present this in a way that you can assimilate this the way that you would like to, given the evidence, given the comparison and all of that, and the conceptual foundations as well for both of these traditions. All right, that is the purpose. I want to make that very clear. However, if you have other questions, you can please ask that a little later towards the end of the session, and I'll be very happy to answer. So now a little about myself. Now, I thought that it's good for everyone in the room, or all the people who are watching this, know a little about myself, why I'm presenting this topic. All right, so there are two important reasons. The first thing is I am exposed to the secular and evidence-based mindfulness. And secondly, I am also exposed to Advaita Vedanta. So let me share. So my life is a mixture of these two. And on the left side, which is secular and evidence-based mindfulness, is actually my professional life. And on the right side, Advaita Vedanta is my spiritual life. So these are the two big domains that I very much preoccupy with. Now, from the left side, basically from a secular and evidence-based mindfulness, now I'm the founder of the Center for Mindfulness in Singapore and also operating in India and Malaysia. I've also written 3 books on evidence-based mindfulness. And I'm also a certified mindfulness teacher based on the IMTA accreditation standards, and also a qualified supervisor for teacher trainees for mindfulness teachers. So I supervise trainee teachers who aspire to become accredited mindfulness teachers. So this is the left side, my professional world. On the right side is my spiritual world, my personal life. And more often than not, I keep these two quite separate and distinct unless necessary to actually to look at both of these traditions from either sides. Otherwise, as in my personal spiritual life, I did my tutelage with Swami Satprakashananda Saraswati of the Arsha Vidya tradition. I've also written a book on Advaita Vedanta and 2 more books that will be published in the next year or so on Advaita Vedanta. And in Singapore, from Singapore rather, I teach very serious sadhakas and mumukshus who want to discover themselves. So this is basically the 2 worlds that I am very much entrenched in, a professional and personal and spiritual world. So I thought that presenting this would probably allow you to appreciate where and the space from which I'm actually presenting this findings, all right, on this topic. So let's now start with the presentation. So whenever we talk about mindfulness, and many of us, we tend to think when we use the word mindfulness, everyone thinks it is equal to meditation. But very interestingly, it is not. Mindfulness is a very unique type of meditation, unlike many other types of meditation. Now, today I've seen, as of now, I've seen many people sharing mindfulness and then they teach something else. Sometimes they mix it up with many other things. But when we talk about mindfulness, we need to be very clear that we are talking about a particular school or a tradition of mindfulness. So I call it a school of mindfulness. So in the world today, there are 3 popular schools of mindfulness. On the left side, we have the religious school of mindfulness. In this school, mindfulness is used in Sanskrit or Pali words, smriti or sati. The Buddhists call it sati, and the Vedic tradition calls it smriti. And then there is a second school of mindfulness, which is called Langerian mindfulness, because it's invented by a person called Alan Langer in 1975, if I'm not wrong, somewhere in the mid-70s. This is nothing to do with meditation at all. The Western or Langerian school of mindfulness revolves around doing things differently or creating new experiences for oneself. The main purpose is to remove mindlessness. Then comes the third school of mindfulness, which is called secular or modern. Now, this is a school of mindfulness which revolves around meditation, and it derives its influence from Eastern traditions as well as other traditions, which we'll talk about shortly. So today's presentation that I am talking about when I say modern mindfulness is specifically the third school, right on the right side, on this slide. This is what I'm focusing on. Now, I want to make this very clear so that my presentation is focused enough for you to appreciate it. So I'm specifically focusing on the secular or modern mindfulness. Sometimes there is MBSR, MBCT. These are very famous evidence-based programs that are very popular in the world today, across the globe, actually. So I'm focusing on the right side. However, there is a connection between secular modern mindfulness and the religious tradition of mindfulness, which I'll briefly touch in this presentation. So when we talk about secular and modern mindfulness, now how am I going to present this? So the method that I've used to do this, to present this talk here, is by looking at modern mindfulness and then comparing that with Advaita Vedanta. So some of you may know what Advaita Vedanta is. There are many schools of Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta is specifically the school of Vedanta that presents a non-dual perspective to the world, the self, and Ishvara, Brahman, or consciousness, whatever that you may call. All right, so that's a specific school of Advaita Vedanta, very much made popular by a very important teacher called Shankaracharya, or sometimes called Adi Shankara. So I'm comparing these two schools, or these two traditions rather, and presenting the findings to you. And so, as you can see, it's a very huge enterprise to do justice to this topic. That's why I started out by saying that I'm going to just scratch the surface today. Now, there will be a lot of data and information in these slides. However, I will only touch the key points, and I will leave the rest to you to look at this video again, and you can maybe pause it and study it more closely. So when we talk about modern mindfulness, let's look at mindfulness first, because I believe many of you are very familiar, given that this is a festival devoted to Adi Shankara and Advaita Vedanta. But let's now look at modern mindfulness first. Just like what Advaita Vedanta, just like how we appreciate Advaita Vedanta through the teachers, modern mindfulness is best understood by the founder of modern mindfulness, which is this particular man called Jon Kabat-Zinn. Now, Jon Kabat-Zinn is a medical doctor from the University of Massachusetts, and back in the late 70s, he was the one who invented modern mindfulness. I'm very, very careful with the choice of word, because I would say that it is his invention, although it has its roots in many of the traditions, which we'll talk about later. But he took this out from a religious sphere and made it secular. And he brought a lot of other traditions. He fused several traditions to create what we see today as modern mindfulness, or evidence-based mindfulness, or what we call as secular mindfulness. So if I want to study Jon Kabat-Zinn, I need to use the right sources, because it's good to go back to the source of the river to understand the river. So in this case, I'm going back to the source, to the person who started this whole school of secular mindfulness. And how am I going to examine his works? So what I've done is I've only relied on the works of Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, his original works that have been published. So I've used those works and only at times referred to secondary sources in order for us to maybe bring more light into it. Otherwise, I will hold on to Kabat-Zinn's works. That's how I've looked at, I've structured the research findings. Now, in the case of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, the sources that I've used is the Prasthanatraya. Many of you may be familiar what's the Prasthanatraya. It's basically Brahma Sutra, the Upanishads, especially the 10 Upanishads commented by Adi Shankara, and as well as the Prakarana Grantha, which is basically foundational text of Vedanta, and as well as the Bhashya Grantha, which is basically the commentaries that we have on the Prasthanatraya. So basically, I will be using quite a bit of commentaries by Adi Shankara in this presentation as well to point out the similarities. And now that we've looked at the sources, now let's discover what this modern mindfulness is all about. Let's look at that a little closer. So what is modern mindfulness? So if you look at this, I've specifically used the Sanskrit word parinama, because here I'm using parinama in the sense that it is kind of an irreversible change that has taken place in the world of mindfulness. So on the left side, you see modern and secular mindfulness as driven towards very, very clear outcomes. Number one, its aim is to reduce stress. Number two, perhaps emotional regulation, meaning that it is actually an opportunity for people to manage their emotions so they can respond better, or enhancing self-awareness. And lastly, what I call as human flourishing, meaning that people who want to lead happier lives, meaningful lives, and lives filled with well-being. That has been the goal of modern and secular mindfulness. On the other hand, when in the right side, if you look at mindfulness, which I'm now talking about, is the religious school of mindfulness, it has a very clear soteriological goal. So what is a soteriological goal? Because it basically, soteriological goal revolves around moksha, mukti, nirvana, apavarga, whatever word, or kaivalya, whatever that you may use it. It is driven towards an existential goal, meaning that I want to be free from the misery of life or the bondage of life, so that I can be free from the multiplicity that I see, the duality that I see in the world. So that has been the case with the traditional or religious mindfulness. So you can clearly see that although modern and secular mindfulness is coming from religious mindfulness, it has somehow completely transformed itself in a way that it has lost its original goal. which is very, very deliberate by the founder himself, because he was very clear, which we'll see later, that his goal was not to grant liberation or enlightenment to anyone. All he wanted to do as a medical doctor was to reduce people's suffering. That was his goal. So you can clearly see why I use the word parinama, because it has transformed, so-called irreversibly or perhaps permanently. All right. So look at the research of mindfulness, what I call evidence. Look at it. Look at the evidence. So you can see in the last 10 years or so, a great upsurge in terms of research or journal articles published on mindfulness. And that's precisely the reason why I'm talking about this topic in this great forum. So because it has become very popular, primarily for the fact that the results of mindfulness today can be measured. Now, that is the reason why people get very excited about mindfulness, because it is showing results, it's demonstrating the potential by giving very clear output. So some interesting outcomes of mindfulness, as you can see here from various research, is about responding instead of reacting, improved mental health, stress reduction and emotional regulation, increases positive states of minds, improves attentional working memory capacities, reduces depression relapse, especially treatment for bipolar disorder, reduction in addictive behaviors, people who are addicted to substance or even gambling or anything else. And also it enhances attention and resilience in high stress professions. You can see a long list. In fact, I have a longer list than this one in terms of the outcomes of mindfulness. There is also another 10 results, as we call it. I'm very particularly interested on the top left, which is structural brain changes. So one of the things that mindfulness researchers have successfully done is to measure what we call as the brain effect. What happens to the brain when someone practices mindfulness over a length of time? So they have successfully captured the brain science behind mindfulness. What happens to the brain when someone practices mindfulness? So this is one thing that I would like to point out among the rest of them, which you can take some time to look at. So now let's look at what is mindfulness. Now that I've created a little interest, perhaps a curiosity about mindfulness, let's now talk about what is the definition of mindfulness. So how is mindfulness defined? There are many definitions, but let's look at the definition by the founder himself. So this is the definition that is very popular as well. Mindfulness is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. Now, there are a couple of keywords in here. Now, let's group them very quickly. The first one is awareness. Now, this term awareness is something that many of us are very familiar with. Sometimes it is also called consciousness, especially in Indian philosophy. But this awareness can also be distinguished as a psychological trait called metacognition as well, which is a different type of awareness, which is very popular compared to what is popular in Indian philosophy. So that is one important point that we see. So basically, it is the awareness that arises out of what we call as paying attention. Now, paying attention here is meditation, because meditation is what we use as a tool to pay attention. And this meditation is qualified by being purposefully done in the present moment, non-judgmentally. And then Kabat-Zinn adds two more important words. He says, in the service of self-understanding and wisdom. Now, this is very beautiful. So he says that this whole awareness that arises through that meditation is in the service of knowing oneself, and it leads to wisdom. That's his definition. And by now, many of you who are very familiar with Indian philosophy, yoga, or Advaita Vedanta, you would probably see some connecting points already. However, these are very distinct points which we are going to look at shortly, because what he's talking about comes from a very, very clear influence that he had experienced in the 1970s, which we'll talk about shortly. And there is two important mechanisms of mindfulness meditation. So these two important mechanisms distinguishes it from all the other types of meditation, especially Patanjali Yoga, all right, which we'll talk about right now. So these two mechanisms, as we call it, is focused attention as one of the mechanisms, and the second one is called open monitoring. Now, focused attention in Indian philosophy or in Sanskrit, it can be called as a Dhaarana, all right, or sometimes it's called Dhyana, but Dhyana is a very loaded word. I would say Dhaarana perhaps is a better way of a better translation in this context. All right, so it is a focused attention, meaning concentration, right? So you can see the definition here. The second one is open monitoring. Now, open monitoring is the unique aspect of mindfulness meditation. It is not focused attention, because at the level of focused attention, mindfulness meditation is just like any other meditation, because all meditation involves some type of focused attention. But when it comes to open monitoring, which is basically a way of relating with what's happening in the meditation experience, it is like accepting whatever that is happening in the field of your awareness, which is basically accepting without any judgment. So you're not reacting to the experience in the meditation. A simple example, if you are noticing a pain in your body right now, without pushing it away, you just let it be. So that a kind of what I call creating a very positive relationship with pain itself through non-reaction by acceptance. So the unique mechanism of mindfulness meditation is then this open monitoring. This is the most unique part of mindfulness meditation, which makes it very unique compared to other types of meditation. So with that now, there are also 7 attitudes of mindfulness. Kabat-Zinn takes a lot of pain to bring across these 7 attitudes, because he says these 7 attitudes is like the soil on which a tree is planted. So if the tree is your mindfulness practice, then these 7 attitudes is like the soil, it's like the foundation that actually allows you to cultivate mindfulness. And some of them is something that you may already be familiar with. It takes a few seconds to look at it. So you can see that, that these 7 attitudes are actually very critical for a mindfulness practitioner. Then next up, what are the mindfulness practices that we call sometimes meditation? So these are also quite unique. So here you can see on the left side in the purple color, these are what we call as the core mindfulness meditation practices. Number 1 is called the sitting meditation. Number 2 is called the body scan. And number 3, the third type is called mindful yoga, which sometimes he calls it mindful hatha yoga. All right, he uses the term as well. So these 3 become the core mindfulness practices that are found across all mindfulness, regardless of whether they are evidence-based or not. These 3 will be usually there. Sometimes mindful yoga is called mindful movement. On the right side, you see other types of mindfulness practices, like the loving kindness meditation, or awareness of breath, paying attention to the breath, or mindful eating, or even walking meditation. So here you can see a very interesting part of mindfulness practices is that mindfulness is not just about sitting and meditating with your eyes closed, right? I believe you have noticed that by now. So this makes it very unique. So with this, I have now presented what modern mindfulness is all about in a nutshell, right? Pardon me, it's very brief. You can do more research about this, but this gives us a kind of a context, what modern mindfulness is. Now, I'm going to present to you the research findings, or what I've found in while encountering this. So I started to look at this findings that I'm sharing now as early as 2014 or 2013, when I first started reading Jon Kabat-Zinn's book, and I was also being trained as well. So when I was looking at the book, I saw some very interesting details in his works. And as I studied more and more, there seemed to be something very interesting, because as much as mindfulness has been taken to be a Buddhist practice, which is what the world presents it till today, even the research world, but there appears to be a lot of non-Buddhistic elements. And I'm going to point out a lot of interesting non-Buddhistic elements in the works of Kabat-Zinn, which I'm going to share, and I'm going to show you evidence as well. So now let's look at the philosophical aspects that is very unique when it comes to modern mindfulness. So here, the first thing that we see in Kabat-Zinn's work is that he has a philosophy of the self. That means he looks at the human self in a very unique way. And some of you who may be very familiar with Advaita Vedanta, you would see this, you would find a lot of parallels. So here he says, although our patients, because the first first mindfulness-based program that was launched was actually for clinical patients in hospital settings. So he says, Although our patients all come with various problems, diagnoses, and ailments, we make every effort to apprehend their intrinsic wholeness. Very interesting word, intrinsic wholeness. Now, as many of you may know, that the discussion around wholeness is quite absent in Buddhism. In Buddhism, the concept of wholeness almost does not exist. It is, if you look at Kshanikavada, Vijnanavada, or Shunyavada, all these early Buddhist schools, you don't have discussions around wholeness or something that is intrinsically there, because their argument is nothing has any kind of inherent value because everything is actually fragments, or it can in a form of aggregates. That's the argument. So here you see a very interesting word that he uses. Here's another quote. We are also what was present before the scarring, our original wholeness, what was born whole. And we can reconnect with that intrinsic wholeness at any time, because its very nature is that it is always present. Very interesting, always present. It is like a very interesting, it's like saying that it is nitya, it is a nityam. That is what it looks like. It is who we truly are. So it is saying, it's talking about the nature of the self being intrinsically whole, and it is always available. It is always there all the time. Like it is like, as we use the word sat or satyam or nityam in Sanskrit. Now, this is an idea that you see. And then further, a third quote, when we are in touch with being whole, we feel at one with everything. Here is an idea of non-duality or Advaita that you see, being one with everything, which is also very much absent in early Buddhist teachings. You don't see that. And he says, when we feel at one with everything, we feel whole ourselves. Again, non-dualism or non-duality is actually alluded. So when you look at this, it's very interesting because you don't find this in Buddhism. In fact, the whole tone in which Kabat-Zinn presents is very positive. It seems to be very life affirmative, meaning that life is worth living. Guys, there's nothing that is bad in this life. Everything is good because you are whole. In spite of all your problems, you are whole. Very beautiful, right? Very similar words that you have found in the Advaita Vedanta works as well. But let's look at a bit about Buddhism, because the way we see Buddhism today is very different from the way people saw Buddhism in the early years. Let's present some research, what I call presentation or some summary about Buddhist teaching. So here is an excerpt from a very, very celebrated Buddhist scholar called Robert Sharp. He says, early Buddhist sutras in general and Theravada teachings in particular hold that, number one, to live is to suffer. The only genuine remedy, number two, which is the only genuine remedy to suffering, is escape from samsara. And number three, escape requires, among other things, abandoning hope that happiness in this world is possible. So this is very similar to the first of the noble truth, which is life is suffering, sabbhe dukkha, right, in Pali. So it is very, very similar, as you can see. So it is, as you can see, there is a pessimistic tone when it comes to presenting the goal of Buddhism in the early years, especially. And I don't think it has changed significantly, except for some reinterpretations that has taken place recently. And of course, people look at it I accept that this can be looked at it differently as well. And then here's another one. You see, he says another one. He says, today, Buddhist insight is touted as the very antithesis of depression. Rather than cultivating a desire to abandon the world, Buddhism is seen as a science of happiness, a way of easing the pain of existence. He says, last line is very, very apt. Buddhist practice is reduced to meditation, and meditation in turn is reduced to mindfulness, which is touted as a therapeutic practice that leads to an emotionally fulfilling and rewarding life. Now, look at that kind of an implicit sarcasm in this excerpt that I have by Robert Sharp. So what you see is, you don't see that positivity that is required in Buddhist teachings. I'm not saying that positivity is not there, it's not required, because the starting point of the Buddhist truth, which is also similar to Vedanta in some ways, I'm not saying it is completely different. There is some similarity, but there is a difference as well, which we'll look at shortly. But Buddhism was entrenched entirely on the truth that life is suffering. And in that sense, it had a very pessimistic tone, which is not there in modern mindfulness. So the question now is, where does it come from? Let's look at that now. So if you look at this, when you looked at Jon Kabat-Zinn's quotes earlier, you see two ideas emerging from the three statements that I quoted. There are more statements. I only quoted three. Now, the first one is, he says, wholeness is intrinsic. Very interesting. It is like swabhava. In Sanskrit, it's called swabhava. It is intrinsic to yourself or innate to yourself. Number two, wholeness is non-dual, which is Advaita. All right, or doesn't have any Bheda or Abheda. That's what Shankara uses mostly. All right, so it doesn't have Bheda, non-dual, he says, which Kabat-Zinn says. All right, and then you can see now we can discuss or conclude saying that these ideas of wholeness were not taught in early Buddhism. We know that but modern mindfulness adopts a more life positive approach compared to a pessimistic approach. We can safely say that from the works. Then number three, ideas of wholeness are found in the Upanishads. As you know, in the session, there was a Shanti mantra chanted by Sanjeevji, Purnamadav Purnamidam, which is actually the whole, in the Dhaarana Upanishad, there is a commentary on this mantra by Shankara. He does a very great job in presenting the meaning of the two Purnams, supposedly. There are no two Purnams to start with. So he says here that this wholeness is very similar to what the Upanishad presents. You can find this concept of Purna in the Dhaarana Upanishad. You find it in the Bhagavad Gita. And then you also find another representation or another word in Sanskrit for wholeness, which is Ananta, limitless, meaning complete. In Taittiriya Upanishad, Brahma Sutra, and Chandogya Upanishad. You can find that. I'm giving you all the references so that you can refer to it. So this is very interesting, isn't it? So what can we say? We can say safely that the non-duality alluded, I use the word alluded, all right, very, very deliberately, because we don't know for sure, all right, but at least we know that there seems to be an allusion. The non-duality alluded is an idea very similar to Advaita Vedanta. That much we can say. So now that we've looked at the philosophical findings, let's go further. Let's now look at the meditation, a unique type of meditation, because modern mindfulness or mindfulness meditation is something that is very, very unique. So let's look at this uniqueness and see whether there are parallels in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And obviously, you know what I'm going to share. So in the Advaita tradition, there are two types of meditation. Some of you may be very familiar. Some of you may not be familiar. But those of you who may not be familiar, these two types of meditation is called Purusha Tantram, or the other second type is called Vastu Tantram. The Purusha Tantra meditation is also called sometimes Kartri Tantra. All right, sometimes called Kartri Tantra. So the Purusha Tantra meditation is usually the type of meditation that is taught in Yoga Sutras or the Hatha Yoga traditions or all the yoga tradition. When I use the word yoga, I'm talking about Patanjali Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Tantra Yoga, all of that. All of these yoga traditions employ meditation that revolves around Purusha Tantra. The uniqueness of the Purusha Tantra is that you can choose to do it, you can choose not to do it, or you can choose to do it in another way. That's one feature. The other feature is the effect of the meditation is dependent on the effort that you put. Let me repeat this. The effect of the meditation is dependent on the effort that you put. So if you put more effort, the results are greater. If you put less effort, the results may not be as great. That is the first category. Vastu Tantra is very interesting. Vastu Tantra is a kind of meditation that doesn't require effort per se, because the meditation depends on the vastu. Here the vastu means an object or a reality. In the case of Advaita Vedanta, many of you may be familiar with the Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana as the triple means in the Dhaarana Upanishad. So in the Dhaarana Upanishad, the meditation that is given as sometimes Nididhyasana, right, is actually belonging to the Vastu Tantra type of meditation, because Nididhyasana is a very unique type of meditation because it is meditation on a reality that is already available in the present moment. Can you see that? It is already available in the present moment. Whenever you use the word available in the present moment, that means, what does that mean? That is only the present moment at any given time. It is now, it is now, it is now. Therefore, the present moment becomes Nityam, meaning eternal, which is called the Sat in Satchit Ananda. So therefore, Vastu Tantra refers to a type of meditation that is on an object that is always available. So now let's do the comparison. You can find the references. You can take a look at it if you're interested. So mindfulness being a very unique type of meditation, Kabat-Zinn makes very interesting statement. I've highlighted the key statements. He says, when it comes right down to it, wherever you go, there you are. He says, wherever you go, there you are. That means it's always available in the present moment. And look at the second one. Here he says, look at this point. meditation is the only intentional, systematic human activity which at bottom is about not trying to improve yourself or get anywhere else, but simply to realize where you already are. Again, the same idea is reoccurring. And then a third one here, he says, mindfulness practice means that we commit fully in each moment to be being present. There is no performance. There is just this moment. We are not trying to improve or to get anywhere else. Lastly, he says, there is truly no place else to go. So everything that is talking about in this meditation is available right here, right now. So there is also a very interesting book, and the title of it is Wherever You Go, There You Are. Wherever you go, there you are. That means wherever the mind goes, there you are. Wherever you go, there you are. But very interesting title, because there is a very interesting Sanskrit shloka that appears in a couple of shastras that sounds very similar. Let me show you what it is. It is this one. Wherever your mind goes, there is samadhi. It's a very interesting verse that you find in a couple of shastras. Let me show you where it is. Number one, you find this in the Saraswati Rahasya Upanishad. Yatra yatro manoyati, tatra tatra paramritam. So what does this mean? Wherever your mind goes, there is your immortality. So it is not somewhere else. It's always available in the present time. And you can also find this in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, yatra yatro manoyati, tatra tatra samadhibihi. This is one, but that means wherever the mind goes, there is samadhi. You're not looking for samadhi. You are already in the state of samadhi. That's the, what do you call the proposition here. And lastly, the Advaita Vedanta Prakarana Grantha, Drisha Viveka. It says, Yatra Yatra Manoyati, Tatra Tatra Samadhyaha. Again, so here you find the same idea that we find as a unique aspect of mindfulness meditation is actually occurring in the Advaita Vedanta Shastra, the Upanishad, as well as the Prakarana Grantha. And this, you don't need this line because this is already implicit in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. So now let's look at another verse from the Vedanta tradition, which is awareness being available in every cognition. Again, the same idea. That means your awareness is not outside. You're not trying to gain that awareness because you are already that awareness, which is here expressed in the Kena Upanishad, Pratibodha Viditam Matam. It is seen in every cognition, which is there in the Kena Upanishad. Again, the same idea that you find in Kabat-Zinn's works, a similar idea. Again, the idea of the stream of thoughts about the Swarupa of the Atma, the nature of the... In the Brahma Sutra Bhasha, Adi Shankara makes a very interesting statement. He says that the effect of meditation is the mind and body being steady and relaxed. He says, very interesting. You can see this this is in 700 CE. And also, Shankara says in the Gita Bhashyam that the self is being timeless. You see a comparison. Now let's do a discussion. So you can see that in the mindfulness approach, there is a very clear disassociation from striving or doing types of meditation, which is sometimes defined as chitta vritti nirodha. Please pardon me, this is no offense to people who may be subscribing to Patat, but the whole idea that effort is required. Nirodha is actually Purusha Tantra, a type of meditation that requires effort. So there is a clear disassociation from these striving types of meditation, trying to achieve a particular state where there is no thought or whatever you call it samadhi. It's very interesting, which is to notice the thoughts instead of removing them. It's not a nirodha. It is not to remove the thoughts, but just notice them, accepting them as it is in the present moment, as you can see. So this is the second component of the research, the finding that I have in this talk, which is the element of mindfulness being a very unique type of meditation. And again, you see parallels in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. Now let's look at the third dimension, which is called Shatka Sampatti. Some of you may be familiar. Shatka Sampatti is the sixfold qualities or sixfold accomplishments or sixfold wealth that is taught in the Advaita Vedanta. It is in the Dhaarana Upanishad. It is part of the fourfold qualifications that make someone qualified to undertake the study of Vedanta. So this Shatka Sampatti, as you can see, is Shamadama, Uparati, Titiksha, Shraddha, and Samadhana. So you can see there is also a parallel to this. You can find a parallel in modern mindfulness, except for Shraddha, because Shraddha involves a faith, which brings the practice into a spiritual sphere. So therefore, Shraddha can be excluded. Once you take that out, mindfulness being an evidence-based practice, all the other five have parallels in mindfulness meditation. So I've done a comparison in this table. If you look at Shama, mastery over mind, in modern mindfulness, that is called mental responsiveness. Dhamma, which is mastery over sensory organs, it is actually done by noticing sensations with curiosity, not rejecting whatever that's happening. Uparati, which is basically a withdrawal into oneself, which is one definition. Another definition, of course, is sannyasa. Here, the modern mindfulness only uses practices revolving around the self, which is always revolving around the bodily sensations, emotions, thoughts, and behavior. That's all they are looking at. They would not use an external object to meditate. So here again, there is a parallel. Titiksha, forbearance or endurance. In mindfulness, it is acceptance, accepting whatever that's happening non-judgmentally. And interestingly, in Viveka Chudamani, Shankara gives a definition for titiksha is very, very similar to acceptance. And then samadhana, which is called focused attention. All right, focused attention, which you know is for the purpose of chitta ekagrata or chitta naischalya. You see that. So again, you see a parallel. So now my final part of this is to look at Bhagavad Gita. So in Bhagavad Gita, you find the most number of parallels with modern mindfulness. So I've broken down mindfulness components into several components, and each one of them I'm giving references. So you can take a look at this. So definition of mindfulness, there are also other words used for mindfulness apart from smriti. It is called apramatta that you find, and also dhyana in Bhagavad Gita. Now, the purpose of mindfulness you can find to remove suffering. You can find it in the Gita, dukkha samyoga viyogam iti yogaha. So you can see that is a definition that you find. And also as being part of karma yoga. I think some of you are very, very familiar with the karma yoga teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, which appears in the Gita for the first time in the Vedic literature, explicitly, I mean. All right, so there you can find two important components of karma yoga, samatvam and what we call as kushalaha, or yogaha karmasu kaushalam. So these two important components are there in karma yoga, which is again, mindfulness is built as part of karma yoga, which is a very important thing to note, that it is meant for people in society, because karma yoga is for people in society. And there you can see that these attitudes are prescribed or encouraged by the Bhagavad Gita. Again, you see the purpose of mindfulness as being part of karma yoga. And there's two elements that I said about samatva and yogaha karmasu kaushalam, or samatvam yoga uchyate. And then meditation. So interestingly, in chapters before chapter 6, in verse 239, chapter 2, verse 39, Shankara introduces meditation. He says, along as he's presenting karma yoga, before he presents karma yoga, he talks about the value of meditation right before that. So that again tells us that Shankara also sees the value of meditation as something that allows you to become qualified to undertake jnana or knowledge. Then again, awareness component. Here you can see all of this here. I've created a list of parallels. The awareness component of mindfulness can be found in all of these Bhagavad Gita verses and the Bhashyam. And then acceptance components, again, you can find different words used in the Shastra, samatva, prasada, asaktam, etc., prashantam, all of them are appearing in the Gita. And then again, further attention components. Here you can see the components of attention, several words here, including samyama and samadhi, samahita, and also compassion, which is a very important component in modern mindfulness, especially in loving kindness practices, friendship, gratitude and indebtedness, all of that can be found here. And compassion and empathy also found in the Gita. All right. And then also Gita also talks about the path of moderation. Don't take extremes. That is also found, as much as in the modern mindfulness, you also find that, not to take extremes, but be very gentle on yourself. Now, this is also found in the Gita. And the idea of wholeness is in the Gita, the term is called Purusha. So it's also found. And the other one is positivity, is not pessimistic. This is the key point that we need to see. While the modern mindfulness is very positive, it is not pessimistic. So you find 22 positive names for Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Whenever Krishna calls out to Arjuna, he only uses positive names. He does not use any kind of derogatory or negative names on Arjuna. That itself shows the very, very strong positive intent. And also the fact that desires need not be extinguished. That is there. Desires need to be harnessed. That is also found there. And then lastly, wisdom, which is prajna or sthita prajna lakshanam that you find in chapter 2. So with that now, I'm going to, in the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to show you now where could have these sources come from? Because you know that Kabat-Zinn was in America in 1970s. He was inventing modern mindfulness. How did he get this? Where did he get from? So he acknowledges a couple of things. Now look at this. Here's a direct quote from him. He says that he wants to remove the cultural aspects from which the dharma, from which Buddhist dharma, from which mindfulness emerged, and make it palatable for people who are suffering. So that was his main goal, because he was a medical doctor. I mean, it's a very noble intention, to be very honest, to do this, to want to use something and to help people, because he was a doctor. So he was reaching out to see how mindfulness can help people relieve their suffering. But along the way, he has been influenced by a couple of traditions. So he explicitly mentions that. He says, I was influenced by Buddhism, Zen tradition, Hatha Yoga, which is postural yoga, and also Advaita Vedanta. He explicitly mentions Nisargadatta Maharaj and Ramana Maharishi. In fact, two of his teachers, Kabat-Zinn's teachers, which is Joseph Goldstein and Jack Confield, actually spent time with Nisargadatta Maharaj. Many of you may know who Nisargadatta Maharaj is. He's a very, very famous Jivan Mukta of the recent times. Of course, he has attained Mahasamadhi in Marathi, in Maharashtra, a very famous Jivan Mukta. They spent time with him, who again, Nisargadatta Maharaj belonged to the Vedanta tradition. So you can see that Kabat-Zinn's teachers also had a background with spending time with Advaita Vedanta teachers. So again, you can see Kabat-Zinn openly says that he had derived wisdom from the yoga, Sufism, Vedanta, Taoism, and even he actually mentions Ramana Maharishi as well as yoga. So these are all the references to show where is it coming from and why do you see these parallels for those of you who may be interested. And then what can we conclude? So this is my final slide. Based on whatever that I've shared, we can make a couple of conclusions. Number one, now the modern mindfulness that was invented by Kabat-Zinn has definitely similarities to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. We cannot deny that. This is not, I'm not saying it's a bias, but we see similarities. Am I saying they are the same? No, I'm not saying they are the same. It is wrong to say that they are the same, but we can certainly see similarities. Number two, the teachings of the Advaita Vedanta could have been an unconscious influence on Jon Kabat-Zinn. Why? Because I'm not sure if you're very familiar with something called American Buddhism. Now, American Buddhism is a very recent phenomenon that happened in the 70s, 60s, and slightly before that. Now, American Buddhism have had a very tremendous influence by Advaita Vedanta, which is often not acknowledged. Very, very few scholars acknowledge this. And you can see that like Jack Confield, Joseph Goldstein, all of them have a very, very heavy Advaita Vedanta influence in the way that they teach Buddhism. And Jon Kabat-Zinn comes in that tradition. So here, maybe Kabat-Zinn is not even aware. He's accepting all that is presented to him. Of course, in a good way, because if he had not done that, many people would not have benefited from the value that mindfulness could bring. And lastly, philosophically, there are more similarities between Karma Yoga and of the Bhagavad Gita and modern mindfulness than with early Buddhist mindfulness. That's my position. Because early Buddhist mindfulness has a very pessimist tone, which is not found in modern mindfulness. At the same time, Bhagavad Gita does not have a very pessimistic tone as well. But the only difference here is that there is no theistic dimension. There is no Bhagavan, there is no Ishvara in modern mindfulness. It's completely devoid of any religiosity. All right, so with that, I conclude my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kathir-san.
Thank you, Harji.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a very, we've been talking about this for the last couple of years, so it's good to see such a clear-cut, very distinct how you captured everything. All I can tell the people who are listening into this talk is that the world is somehow keen and or intent in converting all the Hindus into Buddhists. That's what's happening. Basically, Ayurveda is Buddhist. There's scholars who are doing that. Yoga is Buddhist. And then meditation, mindfulness is Buddhist. So, and non-dualism also is a Buddhist construct. So, the narrative is if you just go to Wikipedia, for example, and Google chanting, they won't be mentioned about Hinduism or Vedic chanting, for example. I was on just the other day, I was searching for a photograph on temples in one of these platforms like iStock and all that. And I didn't get any, I mean, if you just do it right now, if you just type Hindu temples, you won't get any Hindu temples there. So you will get all the Buddhist temples. So the algorithms as well as the scholarship in the West, the media, people like Wikipedia and all these, they're all heavily biased towards converting all the Hindu practices and presenting it as a Buddhist practice. Apart from that, even the Buddhism itself, they're reconstructing it into a new religion of their own, their ideal. So, for example, Buddha was, they're creating a new Buddha, so to speak. So, what if you want your children to remain Hindus and not become Buddhists, then the first step that all of you have to do is to understand the sources. Whatever the practices that you're doing, understand the sources, understand the authenticity of it, and understand what's happening around you. Because preserving our tradition, protecting our tradition is in our hands. It's not, West can do what they want. I mean, it's a free market. It's a free market for ideas. So cultural appropriation, they do the cultural appropriation. So, you can't prevent it. But what is in our hands, definitely, is that let us live our culture, practice the authenticity, focus on authenticity, focus on immersiveness. That's the other thing. In our attempt to secularize everything, we have forgotten devotion. So we need to bring back devotion itself. Even devotion, for example, they're bringing it back with using the word gratitude. For example, there'll be books on gratitude and, So there's all packaging of, for example, Panchamahayajna, right? It's a beautiful concept. It's expression of gratitude. But they will now remove all that element of devotion from that and use this nice word, English word, gratitude, and it's sacralized. So you're actually seeing it in 30 years' time. You're actually seeing how every aspect of our culture is being sacralized. So this is we had a conference. In fact, Kathirasan made a presentation. We had a conference called Vedic Mindfulness to bring back the connection back to the source 2 years back. So my appeal to all the people who are watching and who are listening to this excellent presentation is start claiming the source and studying the source. That would be my appeal to you. Thank you.
Can we take a few questions, Kathirasan ji?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take a few questions.
Okay. I will go by the questions in the question box. Somebody is asking how the systems of mindfulness can deal with the avidya in the ancient Indian say, literature?
Okay, so avidya in the Advaita Vedanta tradition is very straightforward. You can find that in the Gita Bhashyam as well as in the Upanishad. Shankara makes it very clear. Avidya is actually the absence of knowledge. And this avidya is, we are talking in terms of the Upanishad tradition, which is sometimes equated as adhyasa as well, which you can find in the Adhyasa Bhashyam as well. Now, this is something existential, meaning that this is for people who want an existential purpose, who want an existential goal. So the whole discussion of avidya in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, which is sometimes talked from the standpoint of sometimes abhava, agrahana, sometimes also called as mithya jnana, samshaya, all these various words Shankara uses. Actually, he just uses 3 words to describe avidya. All of them deals with an existential goal. In mindfulness, there is no existential goal. The mindfulness is only interested in reducing stress, maybe creating more self-awareness to what the problems are in your life. So it is something laukika. In Sanskrit, it is called laukika. It is not something that we are, what the Shastra is not something that a Shastra is domain. Shastra's domain is not just laukika, it's beyond laukika. To look at something that is adrishta, something that cannot be seen with our pramanas. So therefore, this comparison of this desire to see avidya in modern mindfulness may not be valid because it is something that is laukika.
Second question is, how can we abstain from many external forces due particularly to technology for keeping us mindfulness?
I don't have an answer to that because I don't think I have the power to answer that question because it is a question that needs to be answered by the people who have a vested interest.
Yeah. What are the similarities of mindfulness with karma yoga, which you touched a little bit of it in your presentation also? Okay. Can you just try to elaborate on that?
Okay, so if you look at mindfulness as a meditational practice, now that is alluded to by Adi Shankara in chapter 2, verse 39. In his Bhashyam, he talks about the role of meditation, which is samadhi in Bhagavad Gita, and how it contributes to what we call as the purification of the mind, which is a very important component in assimilating the knowledge that is being taught by the Upanishads. So therefore, the role of mindfulness then, if you look at it, is purely the attentional component, that's all. So, but the mindfulness is completely devoid of the theistic components. For example, the Ishvara Arpana Buddhi that is there in the Gita, that is not there. It is not there in modern mindfulness because it's a secular system. It is meant for just harnessing people's attentional capabilities in a particular way, a unique way of paying attention so that you can relieve yourself from suffering. So there it starts and there it ends. So if at all someone is interested to bring mindfulness into karma yoga, it would only mean that you employ the meditational practices. That's where it starts and that's where it ends. In terms of having that arpita buddhi, that is something only the Shastra can teach.
Samarpan bhava.
Exactly.
There is one more question. Buddhism claims that there is no permanent soul. How Neo-Buddhism of America discusses about this?
This deserves a very lengthy response, so I'm not going to answer this question. Okay. I would rather prefer that. Yeah, it's a very technical question. I don't mind answering, but we don't have the time.
I appreciate that. There's one more question which says that if the modern mindfulness says there is no God, then people following their religion for whole life, should people get influenced by modern mindfulness, the concept, and not protect our religion? How does it make sense?
Okay, very good question. I never said that mindfulness said there is no God. Let me ask you, to the question, the person who asked the question, does any science say there is no God? No, it doesn't. Science just reveals the reality or nature of a thing. Similarly, mindfulness reveals a nature of a thing which is limited to its own sphere. It does not go into the domain of to discuss whether there is God or whether there is no God. That is completely absent in mindfulness discussions. It doesn't, to summarize, mindfulness does not say there is God. It does not say there is no God. All that is interested in is to harness your ability, the capacity to pay attention. That's it. So if you happen to be a religious person, you can religiously practice mindfulness. If you happen to be a non-religious person, then you can non-religiously practice mindfulness. So in that sense, it is completely neutral.
How is Advaita Vedanta's mindfulness aspect applicable in postmodern society, where unproductive expenditure is the major cause of misery?
Oh, again, a very loaded question. You are the question. Your question is related to karma yoga, which is what we call in the Gita loka sangraha. I mean, the problem that you have cited is related to loka sangraha, which requires very effective leadership. And leadership requires a very, very bold and courageous move to point out what needs to be changed in society. And that's what the Gita says. What the wise man does, the ignorant follow. So what does this mean? So this question, if you want to change, if you want to, what I call, look at how mindfulness can change the world, I think that the capacity to change the world requires first a vision of wholeness. If the vision of wholeness is not there, where you see the world in a very positive way, there is a hope for positivity, which is what the Gita, I think in this case, Loka Sangraha means, contributing to the well-being of the world. Only when there is such a vision can there be an opportunity to implement and execute it. But having said that, that doesn't mean that everyone who reads the Gita makes that contribution. Very unfortunate, right? Because a lot of times ideas such as Loka Sangraha are left on the shelf, but it is not put into motion. So a lot of times I think like what Hariji was talking earlier, now action, the action component is required if someone wants to promote well-being, which is called leadership in the Gita.
What is difference between mindfulness and heartfulness?
Okay, so heartfulness is something that was recently created by a teacher in India. They have no real or strong connection whatsoever. So heartfulness is also a little spiritual as well, but mindfulness is completely secular and evidence-based in that sense. There is some evidence-based for heartfulness as well. I want to qualify. There is some evidence-based because people are publishing research papers on heartfulness to show that it has some effects on the what I call in well-being of human beings. However, it has a spiritual element, but mindfulness is devoid of any spiritual element.
Are focused attention and open monitoring conflicting with each other?
It is not conflicting with each other because one is an outward orientation, the other one is an inward orientation. So that means focused attention is what you deploy, what you send out. You pay attention to something. Open monitoring is how you process that inward loop. We call it the feedback loop. And that is very similar to, you know what, let me tell you how the parallel is. If you're very familiar with the Bhagavad Gita, the outward flow is yogaha karmasu kaushalam. The inward flow is samatvam yoga uchyate. So both of them are compatible actually.
Yes. So I think what basic structural difference between two, as I could understand, is that mindfulness still deals with Vishendriya Sannikarsha Nirapeksha Sapeksha flourishing, and the Advaita Vedanta talks of Vishendriya Sannikarsha Nirapeksha flourishing. So that's really a major difference. People must understand that what the so-called flourishing or Jiva Shivaikya Bhavana or Atyantika Dukkha Nivritti or Paramananda Prapti under Advaita Vedanta is Vishendriya Sannikarsha Nirapeksha situation, whereas all others are Vishendriya Sannikarsha Sapeksha things. Thank you very much for this very enlightening evening presentation. Thanks again. Thanks all the viewers for making it possible for this evening session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.